Hi, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm so happy you're here. So big channel update, I did get a microphone and I can do this now. Honestly, the best part about having the microphone is that we don't have to listen to the background noise of the air conditioning unit that's right outside of my window. I'm still figuring out the settings for the microphone and also the webcam that I got. So hopefully by the next video, I'll have that all figured out and everything will look and sound perfect. So in last week's video, I talked about freehanding, and specifically I talked about the design stage of the freehanding process. In this video, I want to actually show you some of the basic knitting techniques that I feel like you need to know in order to freehand your own clothes. So let's get into it. So the first thing that you need to know is obviously how to get the yarn onto the needles. I'm going to show you first how to do a long tail cast on. This is my favorite cast on method. You're going to start with a slip knot, and usually you'll make a tail that's about 3 times the width of your project. Before you hold the yarn, make sure that the tail is facing towards you, and then using your thumb and index finger, you're going to create this sort of V shape. You are then going to wrap your needle under the yarn on the left of your thumb, then wrap it over the yarn on the left of your index finger and pull through. So I'm going to show you a couple of times slowly how to do this. What I love about the long tail cast on is that even though it's a little bit uncomfortable at first, once you get the hang of it, you can cast on your stitches really quickly. I also love the long tail cast on because it is a little bit stretchy, which just makes it universally good for any project. My recommendation, if you've never tried the long tail cast on before, is to just practice until you feel comfortable with the hand motion, and you'll be casting on stitches really quickly in no time. I am going to show you another cast on method. Now I don't know the name of this one, but this was the first cast on method I ever learned. You're going to start again with a simple slip knot, but you don't need to measure out a tail this time. Just make sure that your tail is long enough for you to sew it in later. So to get started with this cast on method, you're going to hold your needles and yarn as if you were getting ready to knit. You're going to insert your needle through the loop from your slip knot, pull yarn through, twist, and then drop it back off onto the needle. This cast on method can also be pretty quick once you get the hang of it. I'm just sort of rusty because I haven't practiced it in a while, as you can see. Again, all you're doing is inserting your needle, pulling yarn through, twisting the loop, and then dropping it back off onto the left needle. I'm going to cast on a couple more stitches, so if you're following along, you have something to look at. I personally am able to learn the best when I'm following along with a video or pictures, so if you're like me, hopefully this helps. So this is what the finished cast on looks like. The reason why I tend to stay away from this cast on method is because it's not as stretchy as the long tail cast on. Also, I find that even if you have perfect tension, when you get to the end of knitting your first row, you're left with this huge gap, which just doesn't look good. The next thing that I want to show you is how to knit stockinette stitch. Now I knit continental style, meaning I hold the yarn with my left hand. And if you started as a crocheter, I recommend that you learn continental style because the hand positioning is very similar. You're going to start by inserting your right needle through the front of the first stitch, wrapping the yarn over the needle, and then pulling that yarn through the stitch. So again, you're working through the front of the stitch, wrapping the yarn around the front of the needle, and then pulling it through the loop. Now that we're at the end of the row, we're just going to flip our work over so that we can work purl stitches. So to work the purl stitch, you're going to insert your needle through the loop purlwise, wrap the yarn over, and then pull through the stitch. All this does is make a knit stitch on the other side of the work so that the front of your work is uniform. If this is your first time knitting, I would recommend practicing by making some small swatches. Knitting tension can be quite tricky, especially at first. When I first started knitting, my knit stitches were really loose and my purl stitches were really tight. And it took me a while to figure out how to hold the yarn so that I would get the appropriate tension. So once you're done knitting your swatch, it's time to get your project off of your needles. I'm going to show you how to do Jenny's surprisingly stretchy cast off method because it's my favorite. You're going to start by just knitting the first stitch in the row, yarning over, knitting the next stitch, and then inserting your left needle through these two stitches as shown, and then pulling that other loop through. Now I love this cast off method because, as the name suggests, it's surprisingly stretchy. So whether you're working a simple stockinette stitch or you're working a ribbed hem or cuff, using this method is going to make sure that your final piece fits comfortably. When you get to the end of your cast off, you're going to be left with a single loop on your right needle. What I usually do is I just use my fingers to widen the loop and then pull the working yarn through so that I can cut a tail to sew in later. So this is the finished swatch using Stockinette Stitch, the long tail cast on, and Jenny's surprisingly stretchy cast off. The next thing that I want to show you is how to knit some simple rib designs. Ribbing is great for hems and cuffs because it doesn't curl the same way that Stockinette Stitch does. It's also extremely easy to knit up because it only uses the knit stitch and the purl stitch. I'm going to start with the 1x1 rib, and for this you just need to cast on an even number of stitches. And this makes it so that you're knitting the same pattern on both sides. All you're going to do is knit the first stitch, purl the second stitch, then knit the next stitch, then purl, then knit, then purl, all the way down to the end of your row. When you get to the end of your row and then flip your work over, you're actually going to be doing the same exact thing on the other side. So knitting the first stitch, then purling, then knitting, then purling, all the way back down to the other end of the row. I'm also going to show you how to cast off a rib stitch because when you're knitting rib, you want to make sure it maintains that nice stretchiness. What I'm going to show you is an extension of Jenny's cast off method, and the rules of this apply to every other ribbed stitch pattern as well. Because the first stitch in our row is a knit stitch, we're going to knit one, and then instead of yarning over, because our next stitch is a purl stitch, we're actually going to yarn under. And then purl the next stitch. And then same with the other method, we're going to insert our needle through those two loops, pulling the third one through. Then because the next stitch is a knit stitch, we're going to yarn over. And then the next stitch, it's a purl stitch, so yarn under and purl, and so on and so forth down the row. The basic rule of this cast off method is that if the next stitch coming up is a knit stitch, you are going to yarn over, and if the next stitch is a purl stitch, you are going to yarn under. And taking a look at my finished swatch, you can see that the rib has maintained its stretchiness on both sides using the long tail cast on and Jenny's surprisingly stretchy cast off method. The next rib pattern I'm going to show you is the 2x1 rib. And for this ribbing design, you're going to need to cast on a multiple of 3 stitches. Unlike the 1x1 rib, the 2x1 rib is not the same on both sides, as you'll see. And as the name of the design suggests, you are going to knit 2 stitches, followed by a purl stitch. So knit 2 stitches, and then purl the 3rd stitch. And you're going to keep following that pattern until you reach the end of the row. Like I mentioned, this rib design is not the same on both sides. So when you get to the other side of your piece, you're actually going to knit the first stitch and then purl the next 2 stitches. So knit 1 stitch, followed by 2 purl stitches. This is considered a 2-row repeat, so that means on one side you're going to be knitting 2 stitches and then purling the 3rd stitch, while on the other side you're going to be knitting 1 stitch, followed by 2 purl stitches. Also, I forgot to mention this, but knitting a rib takes a couple of rows to form. So if your rib isn't looking quite right, just give it a few more rows and I'm sure it'll take shape. This is my finished 2x1 rib swatch. As you can see, it's still very stretchy. I used the same bind off method as I did for the 1x1 rib. And even though I used the same number of cast on stitches, the 2x1 rib is a lot skinnier than the 1x1 rib. The last ribbing pattern I'm going to show you is the 2x2 rib, and for this one you are going to cast on a multiple of 4 stitches. For the 2x2 rib, you're going to start by knitting the first 2 stitches, and then you are going to purl 2 stitches. So knit 2 stitches, followed by 2 purl stitches, and you're going to keep working that until the end of the row. Similar to the 1x1 rib, when you flip your work over to work the other side, you're going to be using the same exact pattern. So knitting 2 stitches, and then purling 2 stitches, knitting 2 stitches, and then purling 2 stitches, all the way down back to the other end of the row. This is what a swatch of 2x2 rib looks like. For all 3 swatches, I casted on 12 stitches. So I wanted to show you what they look like side by side. As you can see, the 1x1 rib swatch is the widest and the 2x2 rib swatch is the narrowest. I personally like the look of the 2x1 rib and I use it a lot when I'm freehanding. Now, a big part of knitting is joining pieces together, especially if you're planning on knitting up panels and then sewing them together. So I'm going to show you how to do the mattress stitch. So first I'm going to be showing you how to join pieces side by side. I don't like to work the seam into the edge column. I like to use the mattress stitch in the column that's right next to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert my needle onto the very bottom stitch of that column. And then picking up the other piece, I'm going to insert the needle through the very bottom stitch in that column. I try to hold my panels so that I can see the column that I'm currently working in because it can get confusing sometimes. So working up the corresponding columns, you are going to pick up 1 stitch and then pick up a stitch from the other column and then pick up a stitch from the first column. Then from your second panel, and just alternating, picking up stitches from both panels all the way up the column until you get to the end. Also, I'm using a curved needle because for mattress stitch, I find it a lot easier to pick up stitches with the curved needle. Here are my 2 swatches sewn together, and besides the fact that I used variegated yarn and the striping is different on both sides, you can't really see where the seam is. This is what it looks like on the back side. You can see we've created a nice even seam. When you're freehand knitting, you might also find that you want to sew two panels together by the tops of the panels, and Mattress Stitch works for this too. So we are going to be working in the top row of both of our panels. I'm going to insert my needle through the very first stitch. And then insert my needle through the very first stitch on the other side. And then we're going to be working into the V's of the very top row of stitches. So you can see I'm inserting my needle through that V. And then going to the corresponding stitch on the other side. Inserting my needle through the V. And then I'm going to go back to the other side. Pick up that stitch. And you're just going to continue this all the way down the row, picking up the stitches on both sides, alternating between the two panels. And this is what it will look like when you're done. I actually just used this method in a cardigan that I'm freehanding, and as you can see on the other side, it makes that nice even seam. The last thing that I want to show you is how to knit increases and decreases. Starting with increases, there are a lot of different increase methods out there, but I'm just going to show you how to do a simple make one left and make one right. To do the make one right, you are going to knit until you reach the point where you want to make an increase. Then you are going to pick up the bar between these two stitches by wrapping your needle underneath the bar. And then you are going to knit into the front of the stitch like so. To do the make one left increase, you are going to wrap your needle under the front of that bar. And then you're going to knit into the back of the stitch. Knowing how to do make one left and make one right is really important if you're planning on freehanding top-down sweaters. Lastly, I'm going to show you how to do a right leaning decrease and a left leaning decrease. Up first is the left leaning decrease, which you're going to work on the right side of your project. When you're ready to decrease, you're going to insert your needle through the first stitch knitwise, and then you're going to insert your needle into the back of the next stitch, and then simply knit the two stitches together. The right leaning decrease is going to be worked on the left side of your work. So when you're ready to make your decrease, you are going to insert your needle through the second stitch on the left needle and the first stitch on the left needle knitwise, and then simply knit the two stitches together. So I knit a couple more decrease rows to give you a better idea of what it looks like. And as you can see, one side is clearly leaning to the right and the other side is leaning to the left. That's all I have for this video. It's certainly not a comprehensive list of all the beginner knitting techniques that are out there, so if there's something else that you want me to cover, be sure to comment. Also, it's my birthday on the 26th, so you kind of have to subscribe. But seriously, subscribe if you are interested in seeing more knitting and fiber art related content. I post videos every Friday. Be sure to like if you learned something new, and I hope you have the confidence to go out there and freehand your own designs. I also want to say a huge thank you for all of the comments on my last two videos. It literally makes my day to read the comments, so thank you so much. I'll see you next week. I love you. Bye.